Right, okay, excellent. So we had a really interesting morning first starting. It's always brilliant to sort of hear Michael. What we're wanting to sort of move into in this next section now before lunch is to really sort of think a little bit more about the whole farm approach, the holistic, not just farm but also food system. So I'm going to be quite quick through my slides just in the interest of time. But then we're going to sort of hear from Hugh Marto from Macavag, who many of you will already know. He will be going through all the practical pieces that we've done so far to think about reducing emissions, the how low can you go element on farm. Then we've got Anna Woodley from Trinity Agtech, who's going to be talking specifically about that whole farm approach. But then we're really, really fortunate to have Professor John Gilliland from Devonish, who's going to be taking us through how this has actually happened in the land of Doubt over in Northern Ireland. Absolutely fascinating place to hear about if you haven't visited. So looking forward to hearing from John. And then wrapping up just before lunch with Graham from the Forest Hiking Foundation. We started an initiative called Right Tree, Right Place, Right Reason a couple of months ago, and the right reason is absolutely essential. And so Graham's going to take us through a little bit of that element, which obviously starts us to think about that, how high can you go and grow elements of the net zero requirements. Oh yes, excellent. Yes, I did have my instruction about reusing, I forgot. Sorry about those people online, beg your pardon. I'm just picking up again now. Okay, so I'm just going to, as I say, do a quick dance through the net zero sort of like approach here. Just conscious, and I don't want to sort of keep you away from those absolute experts who we're very fortunate to have with us today. But I just wanted to sort of say a moment or two about net zero and that sort of holistic approach. Sorry, just sort of slide that a bit, because it is important not just to think about how farms are sort of thinking about working together, and that's really something that's happened, I suppose, for generations, but much more it's about the whole food system. And we recognise our very important part within that food system as a retailer, and also, obviously, in our case, a processor too. So sustainability in supermarket retail, and sustainability is a word that obviously we're going to be talking about an awful lot today, is a huge sort of topic that's preoccupying every business really now going forward. And just as a bit of context, we're sourcing about 100,000 different raw materials into supermarkets, and we are really starting to get to that place where we are having questions asked about lots and lots of different types of those materials. And so here we go. So of course sustainability, as we talked about a little bit, is important to customers, particularly at the right time, and I appreciate it's particularly tricky time at the moment with the cost of living crisis. But when you ask customers about sustainability, they do answer in those four main areas what they're sort of most used to thinking about. So packaging, use of plastics, product sourcing, as well as treatment of staff, suppliers doing the right thing, fair treatment basically, is whether it's to do with the planet or people, is a really common theme. But sustainability isn't just important to customers. Businesses like Morrisons but also others, even though we're now just owned by one business as opposed to many, also have responsibilities to shareholders. And I pulled this figure off that was really fascinating, a few of the references there, that this whole environmental, social governance piece of sustainability is being asked at every single level now, and the ESG questions that are asked by shareholders are absolutely huge. And as this is talked about here, 81% of investors are considering ESG investments in their sort of like future portfolio investment, which is we certainly see by the amount of questions that come forward to us as an entire business. To respond to that, therefore, as Morrisons has got an overall sustained business ambition, which covers 10 different work streams. And these are bits that I will sort of like skip over, but they're available on our website. We can also talk about them separately. But it's all about how we can think about acting in the round, so not just working in silos. And some of the things I want to sort of talk about specifically is that. So we've got various different targets that we want to be when we're looking at all those different work streams. And so much about this is actually not just about what we're asking suppliers and asking the people we work with to do, but actually how we take responsibility for our own impact on the food system. And so that's about our own emissions footprint, our own way in which we do things differently. We're going to have one of my colleagues, Hannah Fox, from our energy team, coming over to talk with us tomorrow to look specifically at investments that we're making as Morrisons. But we also, in that sustainable strategy, have lots of different things that we're looking at, whether it's the work to do with sustainable sourcing, or plastics, which we're quite well known about, of course, agriculture, which we're all very much part of in this room. we've got a lot of words that we sort of starting to think about, a lot of tablets starting to think about with healthy and sustainable diets, and it's a huge area of action and activity in all sorts of not just sort of shareholder but NGO pressure as well within retailers. And one of the things that I think was really fascinating about Michael's talk just before lunch, just before break, beg your pardon, was about that sort of like emissions footprint per nutrient density. I think it's a really interesting topic that hasn't really been discussed or aired as much as it could have been perhaps by now. But as you all are very well familiar with, because of the way that you know Morrisons, you know we are a vertically integrated model. It's very, very different. We've got those 17 manufacturing sites. We literally are taking food from farm all the way right through to the store. And I think that enables us to think in a slightly different way, away from silo thinking as much as we possibly can. And an example of that, I think, is one we can point to, for example, when COVID started. When all customers went absolutely mad and just bought toilet rolls and mints, not very much else, we sort of like were suddenly left with a massive carcass imbalance. And being processors as well as retailers, that was our responsibility, that was our problem, as well as obviously helping the value of products on farm as well. And so that's when we sort of like opened steak and seafood bars, and actually after we'd done that, 1 in 2 steaks sold in the UK in that first week was sold in Morrisons, which considering we only have a 10% market share was quite an impact. But it's really important about thinking about that holistic responsibility to each other. And I think that is sometimes one of the reflections that we sort of think about within this conference too, about moving from what's been turned to a linear to a more circular economy. I think quite a lot of net zero is about how we can make that whole food system part of that circular economy. So how are we thinking particularly, as we talked about efficiency improvements, but also about waste and wasted opportunity into further resources and further ways to sort of like develop and ultimately lower our carbon footprints. If we waste less, our footprint is less. The food charity, we had waste of it, and we have noticed it was one of the things that I skipped through at pace in that sort of like circle of 10, but waste is one of the elements that we're looking particularly hard at Morrisons. And food waste in general is a really fascinating topic. The food waste charity, RAP, had some really interesting stats lately that sort of showed that food waste accounts for 8 to 10% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Indeed, if food waste was a country, it would register second behind India and China in terms of its emissions footprint. You know, it's absolutely mind-blowing statistic, and that waste of products, waste of opportunity is part of us thinking as a holistic food system about how we can reduce that impact of waste and therefore our overall responsibility as a food system or our emissions footprint. And agriculturally, we can think about that a little bit about the linear economy. I just sort of borrowed, you can see the reference to these slides here at the bottom. Agriculturally, again, it's about thinking about how we can have that nutrient resource efficiency, but here it's sort of been talking particularly about how we can use maybe sort of waste elements to be going into soil and nutrient improvers. But I think there's some really, really fascinating examples that we can sort of think about and continually learn and innovate towards, which I'll just go through in a moment. So one of the examples I was just going to pull up for you was I was lucky enough to judge the British Farming Awards, as you know, Morrisons has been sponsors of that for about 6 years. And the first winner of the Sustainability Award that we sort of judged was this chap called Charlie Furnell. I don't know if any of you ever come across him, but he went and looked at the food system and he took apple peelings from the juicing system and he sort of turned those into apple crisps and he sells those now. He also makes apple fruit gum out of apple peelings. And so really fascinating. He was looking at waste. He was looking at the opportunity to turn a wasted product, you know, which potentially would have gone to, well, at one point landfill, but now AD, and making that into something that had more value and was more valued. So not only did it have a financial income, but it also lowered an emissions footprint too. And I think ideas and innovations like that are really, really fascinating. Again, how we're looking at the food system, not just our own individual silo elements of working. Another really interesting example, of course, is the insects, which we touched on earlier. You know, we try to take food, well, we are taking food waste and turning that into a soya alternative, a soya protein reduction in time, by feeding that to basically insect larvae, which grow and then can be fed into laying hens. And it has been proved to be fed to pigs and to fish as a part of aqua meal. Really, really interesting. Again, quite new stuff at the moment, which makes it therefore sort of quite challenging to do at scale, but nevertheless really interesting, really important elements where we're trying to think about the waste that we were generating in the manufacturing business, and how we can stop that being an issue and turn it into an opportunity. And I think this then thinking as a holistic food system and challenging each other is absolutely part of what a net zero sustainable food system needs to be about. One other example, of course, is about processing waste of fertiliser. And, you know, I'm from Yorkshire, where there's almost grass is something that we've been often thought about, and trying to sort of think about how you turn manure into something that is much more valuable and valued is a really important part, again, of net zero, because if you're not sort of having waste as a waste, but having it as a value, your emissions footprint is reduced and your opportunities for investment are hopefully increased. I'm sorry I'm dashing through these slides, I just not wanted to hold you back with others. So overall about net zero, it is much about a sustainable food system, about how we can work across processing, about manufacturing to retail, but obviously within the farm footprints as well themselves. So our own, and I know some of you have often said the same thing, we've done quite a lot of work so far in looking at very species-specific emissions footprints, which are really important to be able to get it right. But we can't act in a silo, we must think about the whole farm footprint, the whole farm journey, and the whole basically UK food industry system, and how we can work much more collaboratively and to help support and enhance each other. So the final piece you might, and I really quite like this little cartoon here, but it might be a little bit, well, that's all very well, but I'm not going to do it for the good of my heart. It has got to be something that's in it for me. And I think that's absolutely fair and absolutely right. So of course there is an element of public funding and some of the things that we've been working through with Net Zero is that how can we help sort of almost line up and access and provide access to the best advisors to help access some of that public funding support. As we exampled before, how can we start to think about some of the incentives on production that we could potentially translate into ranges? But also how can we think about sort of system impact, as we talked about and Michael touched on, where we can find economic benefits from how we lower emissions. And as we sort of literally flew through before, how can we think about diversified or new sources of income that we continually innovate into as we think about this in a more holistic picture. We also do have, and I'm really fascinated by the whole impact of carbon trading. I think the opportunity to bring economics from potentially outside the food sector into the food sector to support growth is fascinating. I think it is about how we sell once and sell right, and make sure we're valuing it consistently is absolutely key. But I think this is a really interesting sort of piece I'm sure we're all hearing about already, aren't we, that would be growing. And much better to do that versus taxes. I just put that little piece on as well. We talked earlier on this morning about taxes on systems. We've heard a lot from the government in the past about the polluter pays principle. It'd be quite nice to feel that we weren't a polluter pays, but a sort of an area where we could have opportunity instead. So forgive me for absolutely racing through in the interest of time, but it's absolutely our firm intention and desire of Morrisons to make net zero sustainable farming about sound economic balance of food production and environmental gain. We genuinely do want to do this with and for the industry too. We have, of course, producers that are coming into our food supply chain, but also into others as well, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to get behind the School of Sustainable Food and Farming, to make knowledge and skills and expertise available to many more farmers. So it is important to be able to sort of think about this for a holistic picture, thinking in those circular systems that share an effort and experience to be able to help, of course, improve us all. There'll still be elements, of course, within that for competitive advantage and for you farmers to sort of develop things that are just a bit different. But I do think our sense of being vertically integrated as Morrisons perhaps gives us a bit of a different start in how we think outside of silos, but we certainly need to keep being challenged by everybody in this room and beyond about how we can continue to improve and do things differently.